It was a warm Saturday afternoon when Jade Monroe walked into the small-town grocery store on the edge of rural Virginia, dressed in a simple black hoodie, cargo pants, and boots that still carried the grit of deployment. Her hair was tied back in a tight bun, and a duffel bag was slung over her shoulder, nothing flashy, just the way she liked it. Jade wasn't the kind to draw attention, even though every inch of her frame whispered military precision and discipline. She was a Navy sniper, decorated, feared, and respected, but in civilian clothes and dark skin. To some, she was just another suspicious woman out of place in a mostly white town that still clung to its outdated ideas like a badge of honor. She had just returned home after a classified overseas mission, exhausted and craving solitude, hoping to disappear into quiet anonymity for a few days. But the moment she stepped into the store, she noticed the stares. Not admiration, not curiosity. Suspicion. A manager whispered something to a clerk. 2 customers moved aside as she passed. Still, Jade kept her cool. Decades of training taught her to ignore ignorance. She grabbed a bottle of water, some trail mix, and a few essentials, before heading to the checkout, unaware that someone had already dialed 911 and labeled her a threat. Outside, 2 local officers pulled up in their cruiser, lights off, creeping slow, eyes scanning. When she walked out of the store and headed toward her matte black pickup, they approached fast, barking orders. "Ma'am, stop. Hands where we can see them." Startled but compliant, Jade froze, raising her hands. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her tone even almost too calm. "Step away from the vehicle." One of them yelled, "Turn around now." Confused, Jade tried again. "I served in uniform longer than you've probably been out of high school. Can you tell me what this is about?" That was when it happened. One of them moved to cuff her. The other kept his hand on his weapon. Jade didn't resist. She didn't need to. She knew who she was. She knew what she was capable of. And most of all, she knew how fast this could go wrong. "You fit the description," the officer muttered, binding her wrists roughly. "Of what?" she asked. "Of someone who looked like they were planning something." Jade almost laughed, but she held it in. Her duffel bag was still open in the truck, where her military credentials sat alongside a sealed commendation from the Pentagon. A mother and her son stopped and stared. A teenage girl took out her phone, recording, but the officers were locked in. "We'll sort this out at the station," one of them said, guiding her toward the cruiser. "I'd suggest you don't make this worse." Then they tried to shove her into the back of the car like she was some thug off the street, unaware that the woman they were manhandling had more confirmed operations under her belt than most active soldiers ever dreamed of. And more dangerously, they didn't know someone was watching. Someone important. Someone who wasn't going to let this slide. As they pulled out of the lot with Jade cuffed and silent, another black SUV with tinted windows rolled to a stop across the street. The driver leaned forward, picked up a phone, and spoke 6 calm, lethal words. "You just detained the wrong woman." That was the moment the real storm began. Jade sat in the holding room of the small-town precinct, still cuffed, her wrists beginning to chafe. The sterile fluorescent lights overhead buzzing like angry flies. The air smelled of stale coffee and ego. The 2 arresting officers stood just outside the door, trading smug comments, thinking they'd just made a high-profile stop. They had no idea who she was, no idea what kind of nightmare they had just pulled into their jurisdiction. The younger one, Officer Ridley, was still hyped from the arrest, bouncing on the balls of his feet, chuckling to himself. "You believe this?" She acted all calm, like she didn't do anything. "You see, that bag could have had weapons in it." She looked like she'd done time or something. The older cop, Sergeant Blake, glanced through the window into the room. She had that "don't mess with me" look though. Eyes like a killer, cold, military maybe, but she matched the call. Dark hoodie, black boots, black woman, suspicious as hell. Neither of them had checked the duffel thoroughly. Neither of them bothered to read the federal ID tag clipped to the outside, covered by a folded field jacket. That badge alone would have stopped a sane man cold. But these 2 were fueled by assumption and local bravado. Meanwhile, the phone at the front desk began to ring. The clerk answered lazily, not expecting what came next. "Put your chief on, now." It wasn't a request. The voice on the line had the kind of tone that made stomachs clench, commanding, precise, with that quiet storm beneath the surface. Within 5 minutes, the precinct's police chief, a man with more years behind a desk than in the field, came hurrying down the hall, tie Hafen, eyes wide. He peeked into the holding room, and his face drained of color when he saw the name written on the ID pulled from Jade's bag. Monroe. Jade, United States Navy. Clearance. Top secret. Sniper designation. Omega 7 status. Active. Commendations. Multiple authority. DOD. Direct Pentagon oversight. He backed up like he'd seen a ghost. Then the second call came, this one to his direct line. It wasn't from Washington. It was from Quantico. The voice identified itself only as General Hastings. That name sent chills down the chief's spine. A 4-star general with pull across military branches. Hastings didn't ask what had happened. He told the chief exactly what would happen. You've detained an active duty operative with national-level security clearance and over a decade of covert deployment. She was followed from the moment she stepped into your town. My men watched, we recorded, and now you will listen. You will uncuff her. You will walk into that room and apologize like your job depends on it, because it does. And you will do it before I arrive in person within the next 30 minutes. If she is not treated with the dignity her service demands, I will have every soul in that building stripped of rank, sued under federal violation statutes, and made an example of for the next 5 years in every law enforcement academy across the country. Do I make myself clear? The line went dead. Cold sweat broke out on the chief's forehead. He turned to the arresting officers, who were still smirking like this was some episode of Cops. Uncuff her now, and you better pray she's in a forgiving mood. Blake scoffed. What's going on, Chief? You serious? The chief grabbed him by the collar, his voice trembling with barely contained panic. You just put cuffs on a Navy sniper personally protected by a 4-star general. You don't even know the kind of career-ending crapstorm you're in. Now move. Back in the room, Jade sat in silence, eyes closed, breathing slow. She could hear the commotion outside. They were unraveling good. The cuffs were suddenly yanked free by trembling hands. Blake mumbled something about a misunderstanding, but Jade didn't even look at him. She stood, flexed her wrists, and retrieved her bag. Where's your supervisor? She asked coldly. Before they could respond, the entire building shook as black SUVs pulled up outside. The front doors opened. Boots hit the floor. Not the kind that belonged to local law enforcement, but the kind that carried men who could break you without raising their voices. 6 uniformed men stepped inside Special Command, insignia marked, faces unreadable. Behind them, dressed in full dress blues with 4 silver stars across his shoulders, walked General Curtis Hastings, a legend in his own right, known for only 2 things: command, presence, and zero tolerance for disrespecting his people. And Jade Monroe was his sniper. When Hastings stepped into the holding room and saw her standing calm, collected, unbroken, he saluted, not just out of respect, but out of deference. The officers watched in stunned disbelief as a 4-star general rendered honors to the very woman they had treated like a criminal. Then he turned to them, jaw clenched. You don't know who you just laid hands on, Hastings growled, stepping between them and Jade, but you're about to learn. And with that, the reckoning began. The precinct, once humming with the low buzz of mundane routine, had fallen silent as the gravity of their mistake crashed down like thunder. General Curtis Hastings didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The authority in his presence was overwhelming, a kind of pressure that made men stand straighter, choose their words more carefully, and sweat through their uniforms. Behind him, his security team spread out, scanning every corner, taking mental snapshots, every motion calibrated and deliberate. Jade stood beside him, arms crossed, her face unreadable. She hadn't said a word since Hastings arrived, because she had nothing to say, but because she knew her silence now spoke louder than fury ever could. She had already endured the humiliation, the sting of metal cuffs, the indignity of being judged by her skin and silence. What came next wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. Hastings turned to face the chief of police, who was now pale and trembling, beads of sweat forming at his temples as if he were standing trial before a tribunal. Do you know what she is? Hastings asked, motioning to Jade with one gloved hand. She's not just some officer, not just another name in a file. She is one of only 7 active snipers cleared for Operation Black Veil. You've never heard of it because it's buried so deep in the Pentagon. Most generals don't even get briefed on it. She's pulled American lives out of burning zones with a rifle from 2,000 meters. She's ended hostage crises with a single shot through reinforced glass while suspended from a chopper. She's walked into war zones we don't even publicly admit exist and come out clean. She's a weapon with a conscience, and you put her in cuffs because she dared to walk through your town with black skin and confidence. The room tensed. No one dared breathe. The 2 arresting officers stood motionless, their earlier arrogance now melted into the floor beneath them. Hastings kept going. You judged her by her look. You judged her by her silence. But this woman has more discipline in her little finger than you've had in your entire lives. And you didn't just insult her, you insulted the United States Navy. You insulted the flag you pretend to serve. And most unforgivably, you insulted me by touching someone under my command. He paused and looked around the room. This is not going away quietly. Your badges, your pensions, your reputations, every inch of them is now under review. I have federal agents outside right now. Internal Affairs has been activated. Your officers are being recorded. This entire precinct is under audit starting now. The chief tried to stammer an apology, but Hastings raised a hand, silencing him. No, don't speak. You'll get your chance in court, in hearings, in front of panels, but not in front of her. He turned to Jade. Commander Monroe, do you wish to make a statement? She nodded slowly, stepped forward, and faced the two officers who had arrested her. You assumed I was dangerous, she said, her voice level, clear, and the truth is, you were right. But not in the way you think. I am dangerous. I've taken out warlords with less warning than you gave me. I've neutralized threats before they even knew I was in the country. And yet, I let you handcuff me because I knew my real weapon wasn't on my back. It was my discipline, my restraint. And that is something you clearly know nothing about. She let that sink in, then added, you treated me like a threat, not because of what I did, but because of what I look like. And that's the real danger in this country, not the weapons we carry, but the fear you carry around in your heads. Hastings nodded with pride. Then he handed Jade a sealed folder. By the way, this came in today. They expedited it when they heard what happened. She opened it and smiled faintly. Inside was her promotion letter, official confirmation. Lieutenant Commander Jade Monroe, assigned directly to National Security Command. A wave of quiet dignity washed over her. She didn't need a courtroom. She didn't need retribution. She had already won. As the general led her outside, a growing crowd had gathered. Word had traveled fast. Veterans from the local VFW stood silently at attention. A group of young black girls in ROTC uniforms saluted as she passed. One of them whispered, "She's real." Jade glanced over, smiled briefly, then walked toward the waiting SUV. As the door closed behind her and the motor hummed to life, General Hastings looked back at the station and said the last words anyone would hear from him that day. Today, you made history, not for bravery, not for justice, but for becoming the symbol of everything broken and a reminder of what must never be repeated again. The convoy pulled away, leaving the precinct in stunned silence, and Jade, unshaken, unbroken, disappeared into classified shadows once more, not because she needed to hide, but because warriors like her don't need the spotlight. They are the standard.